Okay, we are recording. So Yasmin, go ahead and take it away.
Hey guys, so my name is Yasmin Naaman. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in New York. I own what is now a group private practice starting this March. My practice, I use pronouns because to me it is my baby. So she will be 2 in August. So a little bit of a pandemic baby in that I started my practice just before. So August 2019 is when I launched. And very soon after, I wasn't even a year in before we were smashed with the pandemic. So I wanted to talk today just sort of about a little bit about me, what I do, and then sort of a parallel that I've noticed during the pandemic. So I specialize in working with women of color, primarily Black women. And so what's interesting is that the pandemic has given us this like global trauma that everyone is experiencing at the same time. And so, most of my clients, and I would even say all of my clients, because they're women of color, have some kind of trauma history to a certain extent, whether it's just from having microaggressions and things like that, and experiencing just generational traumas, or if it's all the way to the point of having like aggressive, either sexual trauma, abuse and things like that in childhood. But because of that, I feel like all of my clients had a standard way of kind of coping with the pandemic. It almost became this other trauma that was existing. And a lot of my clients are healthcare workers as well. So, they're talking to me about these grave situations, but not really reacting to it. And not really having a response of just kind of like, okay, we have to keep going. Right. And so, of course, this was something that I was like, okay, ladies, everybody cool it. But it also was something that I sort of took into consideration of like, oh, this is what Black women do. We're prepared to pivot because we're constantly in situations where we have to morph ourselves and mold ourselves and change all the time. And so that was something I saw that was really interesting, just to see the different reactions and the different ways that people were coping, and how that's also affected my practice, because it's all been this like parallel experience. So first, I just kind of want to talk about that linkage and the fact that I also think that part of it is that people don't realize that we're in a trauma. And the way I describe it is that it's so close to our faces that we're not really seeing the big picture, and we're actively still in it. And so, one of the things that we're guaranteed in life is change. And it's so difficult to cope with. It's such a hard thing to cope with, especially when we're talking about something like a pandemic. This is not normal change. Now you can't see your family members. You can't go eat at a restaurant. You can't do the things that you would normally do. And so especially dealing with, clients with anxiety, but just humans, we're humans with anxiety. This is like, what am I supposed to do? What do I do now? How do I cope with all of this change and all this change happening at the same time? And I feel like I'm stuck. And so the first thing I remind people, this is a different kind of change, but we've seen change before. And we know how to cope with change if we break it down, to varying degrees, of course, but we have to kind of break down that this is uncomfortable, but it also is something that we have to be able to mold ourselves into. And I think that as Black women, we're kind of, that's like our thing. And so once I put it into that metaphor of like, this is just another example of more change that we have to make, I feel like it was an easier thing to start to digest. And reminding people also that we're more resilient than we really exercise. So that's the other thing. We may have been forced to do some work during this time that we maybe needed to do anyway. So, a big thing that I've been seeing is like relationship issues that haven't necessarily been seen before. Even, oh my goodness, a little bit of gossip. My neighbor next door poisoned her husband during the pandemic and was arrested. Yes, I know, 70 years old. And was like, I am tired of you. I don't want to deal with you anymore. To that extent, I'm 70 and I'm willing to risk 25 years in prison. So that's a huge example, but definitely more relationship issues than usual during this pandemic. However, that's not to say that those issues weren't already there. Right. So now we're seeing them magnified because our partners are they're like, have you always breathed like that? Like, has that always been the way that you? Okay, I'm just hearing it all of the time now because we're in the house together. And so a lot of different things got tested. People with addiction issues. This was a time for addiction was going way up of like, I have nothing else to do to cope. I don't know. I can't see my friends. I can't do things. And this is kind of where I'm at. But again, still an issue. It was an issue before the pandemic. It just kind of got exploded now. And so in order to have a positive twist, I've been also telling people like, yeah, this sucks. And it sucks really bad, but think about how much you've gotten done. Right. And I don't mean the whole like start a business, learn a language, that whole thing of like the productivity, toxic productivity. I mean, in terms of just the emotional work that everyone has had to do to a certain extent, whether you like it or not. It does, whether you actually went to therapy for it or not, there were certain coping skills that people have had no choice but to figure out how to cope with. Like thinking about not being able to see family and having to adjust to having like Zoom situations, and even not being able to have a conference, right? But having a Zoom conference because you guys pivoted. And so just being reminded that even though it's unfortunate, the pivoting is necessary. And it's just another skill that we can kind of add to, instead of looking back and saying like, that was awful, which it was, but it was awful. And, I learned that first of all, I have the capacity to handle change. There are so many situations, let's say you get a new job or, probably all of these things may have happened during this pandemic, right? Losing a job, getting a job, switching careers, becoming a parent, losing a family member and going through grief for the first time, and going through grief during a time where you can't cope with grief in our normal ways and you can't say goodbye to people in the ways that we would usually do that. But we've made it. Right. And we're stronger for it. And so I try to, again, even with that pivot analogy, I switched everything. Right. So, inherently negative. However, think of what you gained. And that's kind of what I always remind my clients of. So before I keep going, I also wanted to give you guys the space. If there was anything that you wanted me to specifically talk about in terms of change, any specific questions that you have, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll kind of address them as I go. But I wanted to make sure that you guys had the time. I'll also do like a 5 minutes afterwards, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. So talking about a way that my practice has changed during the pandemic. So luckily for me, and I thank goodness for this because it would have been really hard otherwise, but I was already doing virtual work. So I already was, familiar with the platform. It's not like I didn't have to scramble. I had a couple of clients who were like, if they got sick or something like that, or if they were running super, super late and they were like, I'm not going to make it. I'd be like, all right, let's do a video session. It was never preferred, but it was like, all right, I can do that. It's so interesting how now that has changed because, when I was in grad school, it was like, you don't do therapy over the phone. You don't do therapy on the computer. That's like last worst case, your person's in the hospital. That's the only time you would do that. You want the person in the room. You want their energy. And we're trained to read energy. And so that was a big thing that was different for me. Was those first couple of months, I had to learn new body language stuff that's only from the waist up, body language stuff, even something like them looking off camera, or them fidgeting with their, I can't see your hands now, right? Like there's all this stuff, or I have clients, they have certain tells, right? So I had one, he's, crossed their leg over. I'm like, okay, what's that? What's going on? I can't see that. However, on the other hand, I'm seeing something totally different now because I'm in your house and that's weird. So, people come in and they're telling me like, yeah, my husband really, he requires a lot from me. And, he's really, and during our sessions, I hear in the background, babe, can you get me? And she's like, I'm in session. Right. And so I'm watching this play out, right? You don't have to tell me now because I can feel this. Right. And it comes into the room, whether they want it to or not. Right. And I think that's one sneaky thing as a therapist that I actually enjoy about this. Right, because there are a couple of patterns that I've been able to call people out on without them having to say it, right? Of like, we've been talking about firmer boundaries, but it's interesting that, 15 minutes into our session, you muted yourself so that you could talk to someone else, but this is your time, right? When we were in the office, that was my space. I have you. Even the concept of someone going on their phone was like never. Nobody would ever pick up their phone in the middle of a session while I'm talking, right? But now, I'm in a space where all of a sudden I'm seeing, clients are with me and then they're like, and I'm like, wait, come back, right? I don't have command of the room because they're home. And so even the way that they show up is different. In some senses, it's good because they're usually their most authentic self. But in others, depending on situations, it's not that great because if they're home and other people are home, it might restrict the way that they, kind of do their therapy. So something that I've noticed, some of my clients, all of a sudden, so we'll have our sessions, I kind of get used to their living rooms and their bedrooms and things like that. And then all of a sudden they're in their car. And I'm like, Oh, okay, got you. I understand what we're talking about today. And without having to tell me, again, like a body language thing, an energy thing, without having to tell me, I have an idea about what we're going to be talking about today, or I have an idea about what went on last week, because there's someone in the house that can't hear this session right now. Not that anyone ever really should, but it's like specifically, like if this person happened to walk to the bathroom, it wouldn't be a good thing for him to hear what I have to say right now. And so that's another tell as a therapist, even if they say, oh, no, everything's good. I'm like, yeah, but then why are we in your car? And then even asking that questions can sometimes like break people and make them start crying. And then they start telling me. So speaking of crying, that's another interesting change about therapy during this time is that I can't touch. And so usually, despite what I was taught in graduate school, because good try, I work with women, and the idea of someone crying and me going, this is interesting. No, it just doesn't work for me. I'm sorry. I tell my clients, you sue me. If you feel it, do it. If it's in your spirit, go for it. But that's something that usually I would ask, like, is it okay if can I give you a hug? And in that moment, the person usually will start to sob, right? There's this outpour of emotion. And the odd thing about doing virtual work is that, first of all, crying becomes this new thing where I'm just watching you cry. And I can't pass you a tissue, and I can't do anything. And I tell people, you can turn your camera off, you can mute yourself, but even in me saying that, the moment kind of starts to dissipate a little bit. And so I try to help people to sit in that moment. Even I tell them, like, I know this is awkward, you need to cry right now. And if we were in the office, you would be crying. And so I need for you to like give yourself that space. Or I'll tell them, please do me a favor, cry after this session. Because to me, the energy needs to go somewhere, right? That's usually what that is. If I say something and it makes someone well up, it touched something. And in touching that, you needed to release something. And so that's one concern that I have in terms of this, because I know it gets weird. People like, you're staring at me crying. And I'm like, yes, I know it's strange. And then to add on top of that, so on the other side of this, and we're talking about these unprecedented times, which is why I said that and not COVID, is because it's not just COVID. So again, I'm working with mostly Black women. We're also talking about police brutality in ways that we haven't before. And so that also is a tricky, and continues to be a tricky thing for me to navigate as a Black woman myself. And so my clients are coming in and they're like, I'm afraid to have a son. And me too. And there was this humanness that has come out in my treatment that I appreciate, and that I'm grateful for. And the list of things, during these unprecedented times that I'm grateful for, my ability to express my humanness to my clients and for them to see me in a new light is one of those things. I cried in session for the first time. When everything was going on with George Floyd, I couldn't have those sessions it was impossible. It wasn't a possible thing for me to do because it's what everyone needed to talk about. And because of the boom of COVID, my practice was full. So I'm doing like 8, 9 sessions in a row, back to back to back to back to back to back to back, talking about the murder of George Floyd for 9 hours, 4 days in a row. And it was really exhausting. And so having to also share with my clients, it was impossible for me to hide how upset I was. It would be strange for me to say, wow, that must be really hard for you, right? And they're looking at me like, are you okay, right? And this was the first time that clients were asking me, and it was appropriate, right? It wasn't like a boundary cross. We're like, are you good? Because I feel like during this time as well, mental health became more, the idea that we're not robots as mental health clinicians became more real. And especially just with social media and people talking about self-care for therapists and the need for that. Also, I work with the greatest women in the entire world. And so everyone's like, are you good? And I'm like, actually, and there are certain times where the answer was no. And during this time, the answer being no was okay. And my answer being no, and yet me continuing to do what I needed to do and coping also helped my clients to continue to do the same. Something that I tell them is like, if you were secretly tailing me at Target one day or something, and you watched me for a whole day, I would want for you to know that I'm putting into action the same coping skills and the same, energy that I'm putting into you. I'm also practicing those same things myself. This is not me coming from this other space. I'm practicing too. And also I'm not perfect either. And my clients would be like, I'm like, don't do this. This is not my work. This is your work. I just kind of see this thing over and over. It sounds like a certain thing. I'm repeating back to you what you said to me. Because I think that we also can sometimes get in those positions of like, they think we're the great. I mean, I'm cool and everything. I'm very dope. But I'm not doing anybody's work for them. Any work that's getting done is being done by that person. And I'm so proud, in case anyone's in here, which I see a couple of you, so proud of the work that they've done. And have been able to just push through during these unprecedented times, which means whatever it means to anyone else. So I wanted to open up and see if there was anything in particular that you guys were wondering about, or any tips that you guys were looking for in terms of resources or things like that, and what direction you guys kind of wanted me to give you energy in. Well, while you guys think, I'll just go over a couple of things that I've been going over with clients. So even people who didn't have anxiety disorders before this, I'll definitely talk about that. So even people who didn't have anxiety disorders before this, it's interesting because clients are coming in and I have to give a diagnosis in order to like bill insurance and things like that. And right now, my diagnosis is that we are in a pandemic. So pretty much everyone has like an adjustment disorder for the most part. But I've been giving a lot of resources to manage anxiety. And a big thing that I've been doing is like guided meditations. And so something that I found that I actually, so speaking of how I cope myself and how I practice self-care myself, an app called Shine, which is a guided meditation app, but it's created by women of color. And so something that I've had a hard time with guided meditations, that it's typically a stale British white man voice. It's like, relax your mind. And I'm like, bro, you are the least calming human person. Like you're giving me anxiety. I didn't put a pin on it just like that of like, I don't want to hear this person talk. But I found this app and it was, I believe it was the first one I listened to was a Black woman. I was like, oh, that's what it is. This sounds like an auntie. This sounds like, oh, I can sleep. And I literally like slept immediately. They have like bedtime stories. And I like listened to a bedtime story from a woman who sounded like she could be my aunt. And it was phenomenal. So I recommend Shine. Headspace and Calm are also great, but you're getting a little bit more British stale. But I also recommend going on YouTube and really just typing in, you can put in like, you know, one of the things I love is affirmations for Black women. It's something I listen to. And they have it, you can like shop around for your different voices. But I definitely recommend trying some kind of like grounding, disconnecting from your social media for a bit. And when I say a bit, I even just mean for that moment, because I feel like we're like cyborgs where we're attached to I'm even thinking about how many pieces of technology are in this room, and it's scary. I don't know, Google is listening to me, Amazon everyone's listening to me right now. So also like detaching from that, because in that you also don't have control over what you see. And so one of the things that I've been doing to cope as a Black woman and as a therapist is limiting my intake, especially of the news. I don't watch the news, and I know that on one hand, it's like not great to be uninformed about some things, but the amount of negative information I feel I'm intaking in like 2 seconds of watching the news is overwhelming for me. And so that's something that I restrict. I read what I want to, like I'll read from the news outlets that I choose to read from, and I choose which things I want to read about. But how am I coping? So at first it was difficult. It was very difficult, and I had to take a second and really ask myself, like, okay, what's the move? What's the plan? Because this is it now. You're locked in. And I was grateful to have a job, right? A lot of people lost their job. My job has like really amped up more than ever, which I'm grateful for as a practice owner, but as a individual, it's been stressful. And so having to know when to take a step back. I took my first long vacation, and that was like a really, really big deal for me to just not. I traveled by myself internationally for the first time. And being, once I was vaccinated and I could finally travel again, because that was one of the things that I generally do. I try to take a couple of trips a year. I came into quarantine from Puerto Rico. And so I came in and then I was stuck for a year. So I went following year for my birthday. My birthday is like the marker for the pandemic, by the way, real fun. And I was able to just completely unplug. And I have to do that sometimes, of cutting off my phone and saying like, nope, phone call. Oh yeah, phone calls in Yasmin's world in 2021 don't exist. I speak to my mother on the phone. I speak to my sister on the phone, and that is pretty much it. And I set very strong boundaries. So speaking of boundaries, I have a very strong recommendation that I've been giving everybody by Nedra Glover Tawwab. Set boundaries, find peace. It is literally like the boundary manual on how to start to, and she breaks down like each different kind of relationship, like long relationships, short relationships, family, work, all of that. But having to work at it, because the thing is, even as I say boundaries, you all know who you need to set boundaries with that you're not. And so that's the first step, right? Being able to deal with whatever backlash is going to come up. That people aren't going to like you saying like, oh, you've always been able to use me in this way, or you've always been able to have access to me in this way, and I'm now taking some of that away from you. No one's going to like that, right? But no healthy relationship is going to be dismantled by a boundary. And so it's a conversation, it's an uncomfortable conversation, but you being around that person and being uncomfortable every time your phone lights up with their name and like wanting to run away to a private island somewhere, we're not loving that either. But a lot of my clients are like, I wish I could just like throw my phone away and like move somewhere where there's no one else. And I'm like, okay, it sounds like you need some boundaries, because you could just stay here. Like you could just chill here and set boundaries and be happy. It could be your own little private island in your little space. So we definitely take on a lot. And I think just recognizing that as women of color, we do take on a lot. And so therefore we have to be mindful of it. We have this like superwoman complex. And I think a lot of times too, we take on here's the part that bites us in the ass, is that we also then get fed by it, right? So when people need us and things like that. So having to check your ego. You have to like, how much of this is me also like feeling powerful in this position or whatever the case may be, but challenge yourself. It's hard work. It's not, and I know on Instagram, it's like, everyone's like me sitting in a park manifesting, right? And it's like, that's what you think the work looks like. No, my clients are like, I know they don't have to say it. They wish they could punch me in the face sometimes hard. And I know that from certain things that I'll say to them, I'm like, oh, you wish I was in the room with you. You could destroy me right now. I know that, but you needed to hear that, right? That's where the healing is. The healing is not roses, I promise you. The healing is like sobbing on your bathroom floor and like calling your abusive parent and like confronting them for the first time, right? That shit is not fun. That's not cute, but it's necessary. As a Black woman who wants her own practice, well, my first tip is to email me so that we can stay in touch and I can help you with that. But let me think. The big thing for me is imposter syndrome. That has been the most difficult part of coping. My clients come in with imposter syndrome. They think, and this is the air I'm told that I give off, but they think I'm like this massively confident person who like has their shit together and is like that person in the park doing. I'm not. I'm so not that person. I'm sweating from so many areas right now, and have been, because I'm so nervous. So I think being able to kind of like fake it till you make it, because people believe it. If you walk in a room and you act like you can buy everything in it, people will kind of pretend that you can. And so that was my approach when I spoke to the person with I like Google everything on the side because I know nothing, but when I talk to you, you're going to think that I know what I'm talking about. But having to address that imposter syndrome. And if you're not already in therapy, get into therapy now. Because certain things are going to come up for you. So for me, my relationship with money, I didn't even know that I had a fear of success. I always thought I had a fear of failure until I started succeeding. And I was like, what the fuck is this? This is terrifying. I don't like this. This is nice. But the higher up I go, the lower I feel like I can crash. So I think just coping, being able to like be ready for what that's going to look like. Because my assumption is that if you're in this room and you're doing conferences like this, you're going to be successful at it. And so get ready for that. And that's my recommendation, is to get ready to be successful at it. Now is the time to be a Black woman therapist. You will have business. I have no question, no doubt. We're going to therapy for the first time, and we're coming in with a vengeance. And we're coming in to do some real work, which I really appreciate. It's very fulfilling work. It makes me cry often. I feel like I cry. I see clients 3 days out of the week. I'm crying about my client work 6 days out of the week. So that because it's not because it makes me sad, because it makes me happy. My clients are working hard, and them working hard also gives that validation, on a personal level, not as a clinician, but on a personal level of like, you're doing the work. And it feels good to have, other Black women come to me and tell me that I've helped them, because that's definitely something that's my goal. If you're running a private practice, how can you maintain balance? Ooh, okay. So this is a tough one. So something that I've done in order to do that. So I've always wanted to be able to accept insurance. However, dealing with insurance panels is a nightmare. And so I work with another company that acts as a group practice. So they get a group rate for insurance. So I'm able to accept insurance on my behalf without getting the insurance rate. So that's helpful. That's one big thing right out the gate, that I'm able to like see people for their regular copay, and I'm also getting paid what my rate is. And that's even. The other part of it, and just to be completely honest, is coping with the fact that you're not going to be able to give access to everyone. And so the way that I rectify that, even just, I haven't accepted a new client in more than a year, right? So like, even in that, I'm not accessible, right? No, you can't access me as a new clinician. The way I've been able to kind of fix my negative feeling about that is by hiring clinicians, and then also doing things like this, so that people still have access to me and access to my information and things like that, but on a different scale. And sometimes for free. So it's free to them, which is helpful, and they're able to get that information and the resource. However, be careful about setting boundaries about this, because we can also, if you're asking me a question about access, and I already know where your heart is, which is where your heart should be, but you have to remember this is business. So that's the tricky part about being a therapist and being in business at the same time, is that you're human. So someone writes you this long email about how they need help and all of this stuff, and you're like, oh God, yes, they do need help. Okay, I'll see you for $13. No, you will go broke. You can't. Right? You have to be able to, and I had to literally work with my therapist on this. When it came time to set a fee, I had multiple breakdowns. And having to explain to people what my fee was, and not say, okay, I'll take, and not just, not fold on that, because it's important. My value is important. I need to be paid as such. How do you invest more in yourself? A lot of us tend to, so let me tell you something. Once you start, you can't stop, girl. So I use, Shonda Rhimes wrote a book called The Year of Yes. And I did this backwards. So I had my no's, and this was about me setting boundaries for the first time. So my first assignment in therapy was to say no, literally. It was nauseating, and it was very difficult, and there were tears. But once I started and I felt the benefits of what it's like to set boundaries, and also how much more I can appreciate the people in my life when I don't resent them for using me, there was no going back. So just start. That's my recommendation. And oh my goodness, all of the books, start ghetto if you need to, because we sometimes get in our own way. I love that I'm this person, by the way, right now. I just want to say that. But anyway, sometimes we get in our own way because we try to do it perfectly instead of just starting. And so, like I said, you all were the people whose faces I could see. I know that there's someone you need to start a boundary with. Just start. You don't have to do it perfectly. You just try to see what that's like. Even just start exploring what that looks like. How do you see your value? I mean, look in the mirror. That's a good start. I remind myself, even just now, so I'll tell you my little I'm nervous routine. I went in the mirror and I was like, you're a bomb bitch. You're the best. Nobody can tell you anything else. You look beautiful. That little highlighter on your nose, everything. You're great. Right. And some days I don't believe it, but I still tell myself that, right? Because I also have to remember that there are days where I believe it. So look in the mirror. That's a good start. And remember how beautiful you are in your you-ness. Other than that, doing some reflective work and reminding yourself of what makes you you. There's literally, and I know it's such a cliche, but there really is not another you. And that's important. And that's something that you have to always, nobody can be you but you. And there's no right way to be you. So if you're trying to be the perfect Black woman, the perfect, mother, the perfect daughter, there's no such thing. So just be, right? And again, start ghetto, but just start doing it. And then to be, like a real answer, go to therapy. So that's where I found a lot of my own value, was having to have, my therapist, oh, I love her. She used to say to me, do you know that you're gangsta? And I say that to my clients all the time now. She's like the grand therapist. But, I'm like, do you know you're gangsta? Like, you're gangsta. Why are we acting like you're not gangsta? And I'll make them say it. And they feel silly. And I'm like, no, I need you to like say that you're gangsta. And they're, I'm not. Say that. And they'll giggle. But all of a sudden, the air in the room changes. It's kind of like being women in a bathroom drunk. And you're like, you're beautiful. Like, that's real, right? That's real. Those are some of our happiest moments. And we make memes about it and we joke about it. But there's a reason for that, right? That tribe mentality, having women support you. So that's my other thing, just in life. Have a tribe. Find your tribe. Find your people. It doesn't have to be 1 million people. It might even just be one. But you need that person who gets it. For me, I have a tribe of Black women clinicians who get it. I don't have to explain how I'm feeling about much of anything. We go to brunch and I'm like, bleh. And they're like, yeah, girl, I know. So as a minority client, if you're seeing a white client, oh, wait, I'm losing things. Manifest. Oh, I have one white client and I address it directly. I'm very direct. She actually, that particular person I haven't had issues with, but in the past I have. And that is something that I am no nonsense about, because I will not be uncomfortable in a room with anyone. Not a client, not the president, no one. And so if someone makes me feel uncomfortable, it will be addressed. It will be addressed delicately, but it will definitely be addressed. Of like, something that you said earlier, kind of, I felt that I was stepping outside of my professional role. That's usually what I say. I felt myself step out of my professional role for a second in my head, and I need to address that with you. Because I also want to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. And if it's happening, then they're probably not the client for me. Thus, my practice. What else? Any other questions for me? Yes, you are gangsta, girl. Listen, we all are. Just by existing as people in the world, life is hard. No matter who you are, whether you're a Black woman or not, life is hard. And you have to like remind yourself of that, of like these things that I've done. And that's why I say, just look in the mirror, right? Reflect. Look at your resume, look at your CV, and when I say your resume, I don't mean necessarily your work resume. I mean your life resume. That time that a lady was at the supermarket and she didn't have that dollar and you gave it to her, right? Nobody patted you on the back for that, and you probably didn't either, but remind yourself of those things that you do, right? My guess is that you're a good person. I don't think that anybody who would be doing stuff like this wouldn't be. And so just reflecting back on just who you are as a human, right? You're gangsta. Yeah. So I know that's my time. I don't want to go too far over, but does anybody have any last things? Oh, counselor in training. Well, you know what? Email me. I mean, I'm definitely willing to give full information I'm very transparent about that stuff. To give it really quickly, I did my internship at a private practice, and I started kind of getting the sense that I wanted to own a practice. I didn't necessarily want to do it the same way, and I knew that, but I wanted to have a practice. I got the bulk of my licensure hours at a mental health clinic, like a low income clinic. I really just got a wide breadth. I worked from age 3 to 80 and every diagnosis that you can possibly think of. So full on psychosis to what we call the worried well with anxiety and depression. And from that experience, I figured out which diagnoses I was more interested in working with and which ones I wasn't. And I started narrowing in on what my niche was. At that point, once I was coming up in my licensure hours, I got another position at a private practice. It was a Black woman-owned private practice, and it was all Black woman therapists. And my friend was working there, and she's like, you have to come. And I was like, can you do that? Is that a thing that we can do? Like, you can just and she's like, I mean, and I was like, wait, and the clients are Black women? And she's like, yeah. I was like, what the fuck? Yeah, I'm coming. I'm on my way. And I interviewed right away and I started working there. And that's when a couple of months after that is when I started my practice because I gained the confidence. I was like, I can do this. I can do this on my own. And so I did. And the rest is history. We're coming up on the anniversary. Oh, my palms are sweating. The anniversary of me signing that lease. I didn't even have my license yet, to be completely honest, when I signed my lease. The state was behind 12 weeks in processing. So I had put in for it, but I hadn't gotten it yet. And I was paying $900 a month on this space. And so, you know, anyone who loves me is like, Yasmin, what's your move if it doesn't come in? And I'm like, I'm just going to paint And I am going to sit in here and I am going to, because to me, I had to take the risk. And luckily for me, by the time the office was ready, my license came in and everything literally lined up perfectly. And here we are. I haven't looked back since. So I would also say, get ready to take some risks. Big risk, big reward. This was very scary. Luckily for me, I was living at home and I don't have children. So I was like, okay, worst case, I'm losing $900 a month and I'm eating ramen. And I'll get another job at a clinic or something, you know what I'm saying? But just having to have faith in, the connection that I make with people and understanding that that's what was going to make me successful in the long run. And again, let me knock on something, but so far so good. And I think things are going to continue to go well. But yeah, please, I'm going to put my email address in the chat. Please feel free to reach out. I'm always willing to give information. Because of my firm boundaries, it may take a second, but I will absolutely, when I have time, I will definitely get back to you. Feel free to ask me anything. I literally am the most open book in the whole wide world. Is kind of my thing. But it's been great. Thank you guys so much. I'm so glad I've had the platform.
Yeah, no, just thank you so much for being so open and honest. And it just felt like it was a conversation that almost felt like it was the next best thing to having it in person. And it was
Yeah, I'm
absolutely
glad.
amazing. And so just thank you so much for being so open and honest and vulnerable, and just it was amazing. And we really, really, really appreciate it. So yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the platform. And thank you for reaching out and even being interested in little old me.
of course. But yeah, so this will be our last workshop of the day, our first day. Wow, our first virtual conference day is done. That's insane. So yeah, thank you, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording and thus end the meeting by doing so. Thank you so much again. And if the rest of you are interested in going ahead and looking at our second day of conferences and our speakers, go ahead and check out this link over here. Oh, that was so sweet. Go ahead and click over here and have a great rest of your day. Take care of yourselves, and just thank you again for being in the space.
Take care and be well.
Okay. Bye, y'all.